When my daughter-in-law looked me square in the face and said, "Either you help us pay the mortgage or you'll need to pack your things and move out," I didn't argue. I didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't even ask her to repeat herself. I just stood there in the middle of their bright kitchen, the smell of burnt toast still hanging in the air, and let the words settle. Across the counter, my son Travis pretended he didn't hear a thing. His eyes were locked on his phone, thumb scrolling, jaw tight. He didn't lift his head once. That silence said more than if he'd joined in. I gave the smallest nod, like I was agreeing to something only I understood, and turned on my heel. No begging, no excuses, just a quiet acceptance that the line had been drawn. I walked down the short hallway that led to the guest room I'd been living in for the past 4 years. The walls held their wedding pictures, their kids' artwork, their achievements. Nothing of mine. The only sign I belonged there was the quilt folded at the end of my bed and a suitcase tucked underneath. I pulled that suitcase out slow. The wheels rattled against the hardwood. I didn't pack right away. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded blue fabric. You might expect I'd feel crushed, but the truth is it felt almost clean. Like the moment right after a storm when the air smells new again. Thelma didn't follow me. She'd said her piece, and probably expected I'd sulk, maybe fuss for a few days, then come crawling back with an open wallet. She thought I'd been like I always had. Travis didn't come either. My own boy, who I carried, fed, prayed over, and helped through every scrape in his life, stood there like a stranger who didn't know me at all. That stung more than the words themselves. I sat there thinking how strange it is. When you get older, everyone warns you about the aches in your knees, the memory lapses, the doctor appointments. But nobody warns you about the ache that comes when the very people you sacrificed for treat you like a burden, or worse, like a bank account. It wasn't always like this. When my husband Gerald passed away, I sold our little house in Cedar Falls. After 47 years together, the silence in those rooms was unbearable. I had some savings tucked away from years of sewing and hemming clothes for neighbors, and I thought moving closer to family might help heal the loneliness. Travis had called one night. "Mom, we've got extra space. You can stay with us until you figure out your next steps. It'll be good for everyone." At the time, it sounded like grace. They had just bought the new house in Des Moines, and their mortgage was a stretch. I thought maybe I could be useful, and I was at first. But over the years, the arrangement shifted. It wasn't just extra space anymore. I helped cover a water bill here, bought groceries there, slipped them cash for school supplies, and told myself it was temporary. That's what mothers do, right? Somewhere in there, the giving stopped being help and turned into expectation. And now, here I was staring at a suitcase that had become my only way out. The house buzzed with noise, the dishwasher running, cartoons spilling from the living room. But in that bedroom, I found quiet. For the first time in a long while, the quiet didn't scare me. It steadied me. I thought of Gerald. What would he have said if he'd been there? He was never a man of many words, but I could almost hear his voice. "Marianne, don't let anyone back you into a corner you don't belong in." I laid out a neat stack on the bed. My Bible, a photo of Gerald from our 40th anniversary trip, the old sewing kit I never let out of reach, and one change of clothes. That's all I needed for now. The sound of the twins laughing echoed from the other end of the house. That laugh, that pure, bubbling laugh, is what had kept me there long after I should have left. But I knew, deep down, I wasn't leaving them. I was leaving the weight of being treated like an open purse. As I zipped up my suitcase, I caught sight of myself in the mirror on the closet door. I didn't see a defeated old woman. I saw someone who'd spent 72 years giving more than she ever kept for herself, and finally decided enough was enough. They told me I had to choose. So I did. And when I walked out of that bedroom with my suitcase rolling behind me, I felt lighter than I had in years. I didn't slam doors. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe anyone a dramatic exit. I just walked down the hall, past the same family photos I wasn't in, past Travis standing there with his head still bent toward that phone, and past Thelma's smug silence in the kitchen. I reached for the front door, turned the knob, and stepped out into the fading daylight. The air outside was cool, sharp against my face, like the first breath after being underwater too long. That's the moment I knew this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of me finally standing tall. When I closed that front door behind me with my suitcase in hand, I knew the story didn't start there. It had been building for years. And the truth is, I'd seen the signs long before that ultimatum was ever spoken. After Gerald passed, I didn't know which way was up anymore. We'd been married 47 years, and suddenly I was sitting in that little house in Cedar Falls, all by myself. The silence felt bigger than the rooms. I couldn't even make a cup of coffee without expecting him to come shuffling and asking if we were out of cream. I tried to make it work for a few months. I kept up with the yard, paid the bills, went to church on Sundays, but the nights stretched long. Some evenings I'd find myself standing in the hallway, holding onto the frame of the door, like if I stood there long enough he'd come back. I finally told myself I couldn't keep living in that empty house. It held too many memories and not enough life. So I sold it. It wasn't a grand place, just a modest one-story with a sagging porch, but it had been ours. The sale gave me a little cushion, enough to cover my needs, if I was careful. That's when Travis started calling more often. He and Thelma had just bought their house in Des Moines. Big place, 2 stories, more space than they really needed, but they said it was for the kids to grow into. "Mom, you should move in with us," Travis told me one night. "At least until you get back on your feet. We've got plenty of room, and it'll be good for you not to be alone." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think family would fill that gap Gerald left. At the time, it felt like the right step. I boxed up my things, gave away furniture that wouldn't fit, and kept only the pieces that meant something: my sewing machine, my quilts, Gerald's tools, and the photo albums. I loaded what was left into a truck and drove down to Des Moines with hope that this next chapter would feel like home. For most of my life, I worked as a seamstress. Not fancy gowns or high-end tailoring, just steady work hemming pants, mending dresses, sewing curtains, and doing alterations for neighbors and local shops. I liked it. It was honest work, and it kept me busy while I raised Travis. Gerald had his job at the electrical plant, and between the two of us, we managed to put away a little something. It wasn't a fortune, but it was security. I thought of that nest egg as my backup, something to carry me through retirement. I never pictured it being anyone else's safety net. But moving in with Travis and Thelma slowly shifted that line. The first months were simple. I helped unpack boxes, cooked family dinners, watched the twins while Thelma adjusted to going back to work. It felt good at first, being needed. The noise of the house filled the silence that used to haunt me at night. Then came the little requests. "Mom, could you cover the electric bill this month? We're short after buying the washer." Or, "Can you pick up groceries while you're out? I'll pay you back next week." I didn't think twice. I wanted to be useful, but those one-time favors became regular. Weeks passed, then months. I never saw the payback. I didn't push, because what mother keeps score against her own child? That's how it started, small, harmless. Thelma worked in accounting, so I assumed she had a handle on their budget. Travis's job in sales kept him traveling, and he'd come home with stories about long drives and tight deals. They acted like they were just trying to make it, and I believed them. What I didn't realize was that the burden of making it had started sliding onto my shoulders. I wasn't just there for company anymore. My presence came with silent expectations. I bought school clothes, paid for field trip forms, covered dentist bills, just until payday. It felt easier to hand over my card than to hear the sighs or the quiet guilt trips about how expensive everything was these days. I told myself I was helping my family. That's what we're taught, isn't it? That mothers keep giving no matter how old their children get. But every time I handed over money, I chipped away at the little security I had built for myself. One evening, I sat at the table with my checkbook open. The numbers didn't lie. My savings had dropped more in those 4 years than in the decade before. It scared me, but I pushed the fear down. I told myself once Travis and Thelma got settled, things would even out. Only they never did. The more I gave, the more they expected. It wasn't companionship anymore. It wasn't about me healing from losing Gerald. It had turned into keeping their roof over their heads, making their mortgage easier to carry, being the buffer for every financial bump they hit. I started to realize my place in that house had shifted. I wasn't Marianne, the mother who came to live closer to family. I was the backup account, the unspoken lender. Looking back now, I should have seen it clearer. But when you love your kids, you convince yourself you're just helping, that things will get better soon. That's how I ended up in that kitchen years later, suitcase waiting under my bed, listening to my own daughter-in-law demand I either help pay their mortgage or leave. I can tell you this much. The day I walked out wasn't a surprise. It was the day I finally admitted to myself what had been happening all along. When I first rolled my suitcase into that house in Des Moines, I told myself it would be 6 months, maybe a year at the most. Just long enough to help them find their footing with the kids and the new mortgage. I even told a few friends back in Cedar Falls, "Don't worry, I'll get my own place soon." But weeks turned into months, and months stretched into years. My presence, which was supposed to be temporary, settled into the house like another piece of furniture. Always there, always expected. It started small. One evening, about 3 months after I moved in, Travis asked, "Mom, could you cover the light bill this month? We're stretched thin after buying furniture for the living room." I didn't hesitate. I wrote the check. It was supposed to be just this month. Then came the grocery runs. Thelma would call me from the checkout line. "Oh no, I forgot my wallet. Can you cover this one, Marianne? I'll pay you back." At first, I believed her. I'd swipe my card, bag the food, and wait for the payback that never came. The next week, it happened again. Eventually, I stopped waiting. Then there was Travis's car insurance. His work required driving all over the state. And one month he said, "Mom, if I don't pay this, I can't keep my job." I covered it, thinking I was saving his livelihood. I told myself it was a one-time rescue. The following month, another bill landed in my lap. Each time, I reasoned with myself, they're young. Raising kids is expensive. Houses cost more than you plan for. A little help won't hurt. But a little help snowballed. My pension check, my savings account, even the money I'd set aside for emergencies. It all began flowing into their lives as quietly as the water running through their pipes. I never saw much appreciation for it. No thank you notes, no acknowledgement beyond the quick relief on their faces when I handed over the card or checkbook. Soon, it wasn't even requests. It became assumptions. The bills would be stacked on the counter where I usually sat for breakfast, like they were waiting for me to handle. At night, I'd lie awake in that guest room, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd become responsible for a house I didn't even own. And make no mistake, it never felt like my house. When I first moved in, I hung one of my quilts on the wall in the hallway. It was a patchwork of blues and creams I'd made during a winter when Gerald was recovering from back surgery. A few weeks later, I noticed it had been taken down, replaced with a canvas print Thelma ordered online that said, "Family rules. Laugh often, love much." My quilt was folded into a closet, no mention of why. The photo frames on the mantel told the same story. Pictures of Travis and Thelma's wedding, the twins in matching pajamas, their vacations. Not a single photo of me, not even one with Gerald. I thought maybe they'd forgotten, so I placed a small picture of Gerald and me at our 25th anniversary dinner on the shelf. A month later, it was gone. When I asked, Thelma said she moved it to make things look uniform. I found it in a drawer. That guest room was the only place I could see my life reflected. Even there, it wasn't untouched. Thelma stored boxes in my closet. Holiday decorations, old paperwork, toys the kids had outgrown. My bedspread was replaced with one she picked out. She called it refreshing the look. I bit my tongue. It wasn't worth fighting over fabric or frames. But the message was clear. My presence was functional, not welcome. The hardest part wasn't even the money or the space. It was the way I started to disappear inside their home. I went from being a mother who came to help to a quiet provider in the background. If dinner was on the table, no one asked who cooked it. If the electricity stayed on, no one asked who paid the bill. It wore me down in ways I didn't see at first. I told myself I was doing what any parent would do, stepping in when times were tough. But the truth is, I stopped being Marianne and became a solution to their problems. The more I gave, the more invisible I felt. I remember one Saturday morning, I was folding laundry in the living room while the twins played on the floor. Travis walked in, grabbed a clean shirt from the pile, pulled it on, and said, "Good timing, Mom." He didn't even realize he hadn't lifted a finger. He just assumed the shirt would be there, washed and ready. Moments like that piled up. Quiet little reminders that I wasn't a guest. I was unpaid labor and unacknowledged support. And yet, I stayed. Because leaving felt impossible. I told myself it was temporary. That once the kids got a little older or once Travis's job stabilized, I could step back. I didn't want to believe my own child would let me carry the weight of their household. But deep down, I knew. The longer I stayed, the heavier it got. By the time 4 years passed, my savings had drained to levels that made my stomach twist. What I thought would be my safety net had become their lifeline. And every time I looked around that house, I saw less and less of myself. I'd traded my independence, my space, and my money for the hope of belonging. And it left me with one question I couldn't ignore. If I was gone tomorrow, would they notice the empty seat at the table or just the missing checks? Think about it. What does it say when even your quilt and your photos aren't welcome, but your money always is? If that hit you, show it. Subscribe, like, and share this video. The first time the mortgage came up in conversation, it was slipped in so casual, I almost missed it. Travis was at the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of envelopes, frowning like the paper itself was at fault. Thelma sat across from him, arms crossed tight, her foot tapping against the floor. "We knew the house would be a stretch," she said, "but rates went up, and now the payments feel impossible." I sat at the counter with a cup of tea, listening without being invited into the discussion. But then Travis looked at me and said, "Mom, you're already here, helping us. Maybe it makes sense for you to pitch in. We could call it an investment in the family." That word, investment, landed heavy. I blinked at him, not sure I'd heard right. "You mean help with the mortgage?" Thelma leaned forward, her voice firm. "We're not asking for charity. We'd see it as fair. You live here too. You could contribute half. That way, everyone carries the weight together." Half. Not a small sum. Not a cover the bill this month. They wanted me to shoulder half of their mortgage every single month. I didn't answer right away. I stared down at the tea swirling in my cup, the steam slipping up into my glasses. Half the mortgage meant digging into the savings Gerald and I had scraped together over decades, money we'd set aside, so I wouldn't have to struggle in my later years. I told them I needed to think about it. That night, in my room, I pulled out my checkbook and a small notepad where I kept track of expenses. I added up what I'd already spent in their house: the utility bills, the groceries, the insurance, the temporary loans. The numbers spilled down the page until my throat tightened. My retirement savings wasn't gone, but it was shrinking faster than it ever should have. And if I agreed to half their mortgage, it wouldn't just shrink. It would vanish. The next morning, Travis came to me again. "Mom, it would really help us if you said yes. Think of it like buying security for all of us. We'll never let you be out on the street." But the irony struck me. In that very moment, my security was already being chipped away. Still, I said yes that first month. I told myself it was temporary, that once they caught up on expenses, I could stop. So I wrote the check, half the mortgage. And just like that, the expectation was set. Month after month, the envelope would land on the table. Travis didn't even ask anymore. He'd just slide it toward me, and I'd open my checkbook. Each time, I told myself, this will be the last. But each time, I signed my name and felt the numbers in my savings dip lower. I remember one afternoon sitting alone at that table, calculator in hand. I ran the numbers 3 times. If I kept paying half, I'd drain my savings within 4 years. For years, after working almost 50, the thought made my chest ache. That wasn't living. That was survival for them and sacrifice for me. Thelma started dropping comments like, "It's only fair you contribute. You live here rent-free." Rent-free. That cut deep. I wanted to remind her of the down payment Gerald, and I had once gifted them. The school clothes I'd bought, the meals I cooked, the time I gave. But I held my tongue. Instead, I sat in silence, biting back words I knew would only cause more tension. The truth is, the house had never felt like mine. My name wasn't on the deed. My picture wasn't on the wall. My quilt wasn't on the hallway. Yet somehow they wanted my money as if the house belonged to me too. It was then I realized I wasn't a guest, not even family in the way I'd hoped. I was their financial safety net. A safety net that had started to fray. I'd sit up at night, my notebook open, trying to find a way forward. I'd write down every expense: groceries, gas, insurance, my medications, the half mortgage. Then I'd write what I had left. Each month, the leftover number got smaller. Some nights, I'd cry quietly so no one would hear. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it meant. My years of saving, of being careful, were being poured into a house that didn't welcome me, into a family that saw me more as a resource than as Marianne, the woman who raised their husband and father. I started to feel invisible, except when it came time to pay. I knew something had to change, but when you're living under the same roof, eating at the same table, watching the same children, change feels impossible. I was caught between loving my family and losing myself. The mortgage pressure was more than dollars and cents. It was a weight pressing down on me every day, and I began to realize that sooner or later I'd have to make a choice. After months of handing over checks and biting my tongue, I knew I needed space to think. My life had shrunk down to paying bills and folding laundry. I wanted to breathe air that wasn't heavy with tension. So I called an old friend from church, Ruth, who lived over in Davenport. She and I had sung together in the choir years ago, and she invited me to join a weekend retreat they were planning. Nothing fancy, just quilting, potluck meals, and prayer. 3 days away from the pressure in that house. I told Thelma about it one morning over coffee. I'll be gone Friday through Sunday. Ruth's group already has me a bed lined up. I'll be back in time to watch the boys Monday morning. She looked up from her laptop, raised her eyebrows, and gave a short laugh. If you can afford little trips, Marianne, you can afford to keep helping with the mortgage. Her words landed sharp. Not a question, not concern, just dismissal. Like my only value was in how much I contributed to their bills. I didn't argue. I just sipped my coffee and let her talk. But inside, something shifted. That evening, I called Ruth back. Save me that spot. I'll be there. The next morning, I was in the nursery dressing the twins when Thelma walked in. Her arms folded tight across her chest. Her tone clipped. This has gone on long enough. Either you agree to keep paying half the mortgage, or you'll need to find somewhere else to stay. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't asking. She was laying down an ultimatum. Travis leaned against the doorframe, a mug of coffee in his hand. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me. My own son, watching the scene like it was none of his concern. I finished buttoning the boys' shirts, kissed the tops of their heads, and stood up straight. I met Thelma's stare and gave a small nod. No words. No fight. Just a decision made in silence. She must have expected me to back down, to protest or plead. But I felt none of that. What I felt was calm. For the first time in years, I saw the truth with clear eyes. I wasn't a guest in their home. I was their safety net, their silent bank, their unpaid help. And I'd finally had enough. That night, after everyone went to bed, I pulled my old suitcase from under the guest bed. The same suitcase I had rolled in with years ago when I left Cedar Falls. Its edges were worn, the zipper a little stiff, but it was still strong. Like me, I laid it open on the bed and began to pack, piece by piece, not rushing. First went my Bible, the one Gerald had given me on our 25th anniversary, his handwriting still inside the cover. Then a framed photo of him from a fishing trip up in Minnesota, his cap turned backward, grinning like a boy. Next, my sewing kit. Not because I planned to sew much, but because it had been mine for decades. A reminder that my hands had always known how to create, how to fix. I folded 2 changes of clothes, set in my nightgown, and slipped in the quilt I had made after Gerald's surgery, the same one Thelma had taken down from the hallway wall. If it wasn't welcome in their home, it would come with me. I zipped the suitcase closed and placed it by the door. For a long time, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak in the walls. You might think I'd feel heartbroken, but instead I felt light. I wasn't losing a home. I was stepping out of a trap I had stayed in far too long. I thought of Gerald again. He never let anyone take advantage of me, and I knew if he were alive, he'd be telling me the same thing I was finally telling myself. Marianne, you've given enough. By morning, I was ready. I walked into the kitchen with my suitcase rolling behind me. Thelma looked up from her coffee, her mouth parting like she wanted to say something, but didn't. Travis sat at the table, eyes still glued to his phone. I didn't explain. I didn't owe them that. I reached for the door handle, turned it, and stepped outside. The air hit me cool and steady. And for the first time in years, I felt like Marianne Boyer again. Not a checkbook, not a burden, not invisible. Just myself. They had given me a choice, and I had chosen peace. When I stepped out of that house with my suitcase, I didn't have a full plan. I just knew I couldn't stay. I drove across town until I saw a sign for the Maple Inn. It wasn't fancy, just a 1-story roadside place with faded paint and a gravel lot, but it looked safe, and that was all I needed. Inside, the young woman at the desk smiled and asked how long I'd be staying. I said I wasn't sure. She handed me a brass key with a tag that read roommate and said, "Here you go, Miss Boyer." I can't explain what that did to me. Just hearing my name spoken kindly made me feel human again. The room was simple, 2 beds with floral spreads, a small table near the window, and curtains that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. I set my suitcase down, sat on the edge of the bed, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. That first night, I heated a can of soup in the microwave. No one asked me to cook a full meal. No one complained about what brand I bought. I ate it at the little table, then slipped off my shoes and stretched out on the bed. The silence wrapped around me. It wasn't empty like the silence back in Cedar Falls after Gerald died. This one was peaceful. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. The next morning, I walked down the block to a small diner. I ordered eggs, toast, and a full cup of hot coffee. I sat at a booth by myself and drank it while it was still steaming. Not once did someone interrupt. Not once did I have to reheat it in the microwave because a chore pulled me away. I nearly cried just sitting there, tasting hot coffee, without rushing. After breakfast, I opened the small notebook I'd brought with me. I turned to a clean page and wrote 2 lists. On one side, things I paid for. On the other, things I forgot I loved. The first list filled quickly. Mortgage checks, utilities, groceries, school clothes, car insurance, credit card payments, even takeout meals that Thelma had ordered and put on my card. I wrote until my hand cramped. On the second list, I wrote slower, eating a meal without rushing, reading a newspaper cover to cover, sewing for pleasure instead of mending, watching the sun set without a to-do list waiting. Small things that once made up my life, now buried under bills and obligations. Those lists told me everything I needed to know. I had spent years financing their comfort while forgetting my own. That afternoon, I walked to the credit union. I asked to speak with a representative about my accounts. A woman in her 50s, with glasses perched on her nose, brought me to her desk. I want to cancel all automatic payments connected to 421 Hillcrest Drive. I told her. Water, electricity, cable, all of it. She looked at me carefully. Are you sure, Miss Boyer? I nodded. Completely. She tapped at her computer and confirmed each cancellation. The relief I felt with every click was like laying down heavy bags one by one. From there, I called my credit card company. Travis and Thelma were both authorized users. I asked to have their names removed immediately. The agent confirmed it and told me new cards would arrive in a few days. Next, I called the grocery delivery service. For months, every weekly order had been charged to my account. Almond milk, snack packs, diapers, cleaning supplies. It had all gone on my card. Cancel the subscription. I said firmly, don't bill me again. Each call left me lighter. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I was simply taking back what was mine. By the time I walked back to the Maple Inn, the late afternoon sun was glowing orange across the parking lot. I sat at the little table in my room and opened my notebook again. On the page where I'd written things I paid for, I added one more line, my own peace of mind. That night, I pulled the quilt I had packed from my suitcase and spread it over the bed. It was the first time in years it had been laid out where I could see it. I ran my hand over the stitches, each one a memory of evenings when Gerald sat nearby, watching ball games while I sewed. I realized then that this small motel room, with its plain curtains and humming fridge, felt more like home than the big house ever had. Lying there, I thought back on all the years I had convinced myself I was helping. Maybe I had been, but somewhere along the way, the help turned into sacrifice, and the sacrifice turned into expectation. As I drifted to sleep, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going back to being anyone's safety net. Not again. The morning after I made those calls, I sat at the little table in my motel room with my notebook, receipts, and bank statements spread out in front of me. I wanted to see the whole picture, not just pieces. One by one, I added everything up. The checks for the mortgage, the utility bills, the groceries, the insurance, the school clothes, the credit card balances. I had covered. Line after line, the numbers grew. By the time I finished, the total came to more than $52,000. I stared at that number until my eyes blurred. That was money Gerald and I had saved through years of steady work, his at the plant, mine with my sewing machine. It was supposed to carry me in old age, not keep their household afloat. It hit me hard. I financed their comfort at the expense of my peace. Saying it out loud made the truth sink deeper. Every check I wrote, every swipe of my card, was another piece of myself I gave away without asking if I could afford it, not just financially, but emotionally. As I sat there, my phone rang. It was the credit union. A woman named Carla introduced herself. "Miss Boyer, I wanted to confirm the changes you made yesterday, removing the automatic payments. While reviewing your file, something came up that I thought you should be aware of." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before speaking. "A few months back, there was an attempt to refinance the mortgage on 421 Hillcrest Drive. The application listed you as a co-signer. Because your name wasn't on the property deed, we flagged it and denied the request." I gripped the phone tighter. "You're saying someone tried to use my credit?" "Yes. The application listed a contact number, and when we called, a woman answered. She said she was your daughter-in-law and claimed to have your permission. Since no paperwork supported that, the file was closed." I sat there frozen. They hadn't just taken my money. They'd nearly tied my name to their mortgage behind my back. "Thank you for telling me," I managed to say, though my voice shook. After I hung up, I felt the room spin. I had known I was being used, but this was deeper. This was betrayal. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the wall, the motel's floral curtains swaying slightly in the draft from the air unit. I thought about Gerald again. He was a man of few words, but he always protected me. If he were here, he'd have marched right into that house and demanded answers. But Gerald wasn't here. It was up to me. I pulled my notebook closer and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "Next steps." The first line, "Call lawyer." That afternoon, I contacted Mr. Sanders, the attorney who had helped me with paperwork after Gerald passed. He was kind, practical, and didn't waste words. When I explained what had happened, he said, "Marianne, it's time to protect what you have left." We set up a meeting for the next morning at his office. I laid everything out, the checks, the statements, the call from the bank. He listened without interrupting, then slid a legal pad across his desk. "Let's talk about your will," he said. I nodded. I'd already made up my mind. I want what's left to go where it can actually help. Half to the housing fund at First Baptist Church. The other half to a scholarship in Gerald's name for trade school students. Gerald had been an electrician for nearly 40 years. He trained apprentices, fixed wiring for neighbors, and helped out at the church without ever asking for pay. He believed in honest work, in passing down skills that mattered. A scholarship would honor who he was, I told Mr. Sanders. And the housing fund helps families who are truly struggling, not just overspending. He nodded, making notes. "You're choosing peace of mind." I signed the papers with a steady hand. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground again. When I left his office, I stopped by the park nearby. I sat on a bench under a tree, watching kids chase each other around the playground. I thought of my own grandchildren. I loved them deeply. None of this was their fault, but I couldn't sacrifice myself to cover for the choices of their parents anymore. That evening, back in my motel room, I opened my notebook again. On the list of things I forgot I loved, I added a new line, knowing my choices are my own. I poured myself a cup of tea, wrapped Gerald's quilt around my shoulders, and looked out the window at the neon motel sign flickering in the distance. The truth hurt, but it also set me free. I didn't just leave their house. I left behind the version of myself who kept giving until nothing was left. And this time, I wasn't looking back. They nearly signed my name to a debt I never agreed to. Betrayal doesn't get much clearer than that. If you believe mothers deserve protection, hit like, share this, and subscribe. And if you don't, then write your reason in the comments, because I'd love to know how you explain that choice. It didn't take long for them to find me. Mapleton wasn't hidden, and in a town like ours, word traveled. A week after I left, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside my room. I looked out the window and saw Travis's old SUV parked crooked, both doors slamming shut. Thelma came first, her steps sharp, her arms folded like armor. Travis followed, slower, his head down, but his jaw tight. I stayed seated at the little table with my cup of tea. If they wanted to talk, they could come to me. Thelma didn't bother with pleasantries. So, this is where you've been. Do you have any idea what you've put us through? Your grandkids keep asking why you left. Do you want them thinking you abandoned us? Her words were quick, meant to sting. But I didn't flinch. I set down my cup, folded my hands, and looked her in the eye. I love those children more than anything. But don't confuse leaving your house with leaving them. What I won't do is let you use them as a leash. Her lips tightened, but she didn't back off. They're going to grow up thinking their grandmother walked away. They'll know the truth someday, I said calmly. And the truth is, I gave until I had nothing left. I didn't abandon anyone. I chose to stop being taken for granted. Travis finally spoke then, his voice lower, almost pleading. Mom, we're in trouble. Without you, we could lose the house. The bank's been calling. We're behind on payments. You've always stepped in before. We need you to step in again. I let his words hang there, then answered steady. I gave more than enough. What you wanted wasn't help. It was control. And I won't live like that anymore. He ran a hand over his face, frustrated. It's not control, Mom. It's family supporting family. That's how this works. No, Travis, I said, my voice firm. Family doesn't mean draining one person dry so everyone else can live comfortably. Family means respect. And I haven't felt respected in a long time. Thelma shifted tactics. Her tone softened, almost syrupy. Maybe we came on too strong. Maybe we should have asked differently. But, we're overwhelmed. We can't do this without you. We'll make it worth your while. We can. I cut her off before she could finish. Stop. This isn't a negotiation. I'm not a business partner, and I'm not your bank. I'm your mother-in-law, and I'm Travis's mother. That's all. For a moment, there was silence. I thought maybe it was sinking in. But then Thelma's eyes narrowed. If you keep this up, you'll leave us no choice. We might have to get legal advice. You lived with us. You contributed to the house. A lawyer could say you had responsibilities too. Maybe even abandonment if it comes to it. I couldn't help a small laugh, not out of humor, but disbelief. You want to take me to court for walking away from being used? Go ahead. But you should know I already met with my lawyer. He's seen the paperwork, the receipts, even the attempted refinance in my name. If you want to stand in front of a judge, I'll be there too, with proof. The color drained from Travis's face. Thelma looked at him, then back at me, her mouth opening but no words coming out. I stood then, slow and steady. I'm done living under ultimatums. You made it clear, pay or leave. I chose to leave. That was your condition, not mine. And now I'm free of it. Thelma's face tightened, but she didn't argue further. She spun toward the door. Let's go, Travis. He lingered for a moment, eyes flicking toward me like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He followed her out, their footsteps crunching across the gravel. The SUV door slammed, the engine started, and just like that, they were gone. I stood there listening to the sound fade until only the hum of the motel sign buzzed outside my window. I sat back down at the table, picked up my tea, and let out a long breath. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not because everything was solved, not because there wouldn't be hard days ahead, but because I had finally stood tall. I had faced them without bending, without giving in to guilt or threats. And the peace that came with that was worth more than any dollar amount I had poured into their lives. That night, as I pulled Gerald's quilt over me, I thought about the woman who walked into that house years ago with hope in her suitcase. She had been swallowed up by obligation, but the woman lying in that motel bed had finally drawn the line, and she wasn't going back. After they drove away from the motel, I knew I couldn't stay there forever. I needed a place that was mine, even if it was small. I spent a few days looking around town until I found a little duplex for rent near the park. Nothing fancy, just one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a porch big enough for a chair and a flower pot. The rent was fair, and most important, the lease had only my name on it. The first night I slept there, I left the window cracked open and listened to the crickets outside. No footsteps stomping down the hall. No voices arguing in the kitchen. Just quiet. I remember whispering, "Thank you, Lord," before I drifted off to sleep. A week later, I went to the animal shelter. I'd always had pets with Gerald, and I missed having something alive waiting for me at home. That's where I met Whiskers. He was a gray tabby with one torn ear and a limp in his back leg. The staff said he was about 9 years old, surrendered by a family who didn't want to deal with vet bills anymore. I looked into his green eyes and thought, we understand each other. He wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But we both still had plenty of love left to give. I signed the papers, and Whiskers came home with me that day. He settled in quickly. He didn't need much, just a bowl of food, a soft place to nap, and a lap to curl up in. For once, I had companionship that didn't come with demands or ultimatums. Just quiet loyalty. Not long after moving in, I started attending widow support lunches at the community center. Every Tuesday and Thursday, a group of women gathered for sandwiches, soup, and conversation. Some were lonely, some were rebuilding, some were angry at how their lives had turned out. We laughed, we cried, and most of all, we understood one another. One woman encouraged me to start writing. "You've been through a lot, Marianne," she said. "Your story could help someone else." So I opened my laptop one evening and created a simple blog. I called it Living Light After 70. The first post I wrote was titled, "When Family Treats You Like a Bank, Close the Vault." I didn't name names or point fingers. I just told the truth about what had happened, how I had given more than I should have, how I learned that saying no wasn't cruelty, it was self-respect. I pressed publish and went on with my evening, not expecting much. But by the next morning, dozens of comments had come in. Women from across the country wrote, "I thought I was the only one," or "Your story gave me courage." Some even said they had printed out parts of it and taped them to their fridge or mirror as a reminder. Within a week, the post had spread far beyond what I imagined. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out. One message said simply, "Thank you for saying what so many of us feel but are too scared to admit." For the first time in a long time, I felt seen not for what I could give, but for what I had lived through. Meanwhile, back in town, the ripples were spreading. I didn't brag, but truth has a way of finding ears. Folks started noticing things about Travis and Thelma. A neighbor mentioned that Thelma seemed quieter at church, not as quick to speak. Another said Travis had been skipping outings with his co-workers. Nobody said it outright, but I knew word had gotten around. One afternoon, a knock came at my door. When I opened it, Travis stood there alone, holding a card. He looked older than his years, tired in a way I hadn't seen before. He handed me the envelope without speaking. Inside was a drawing from the twins, scribbles of red hearts, and the word Nana spelled out crookedly. Beneath it, in Travis's handwriting, were the words, "We love you. We're sorry." For a long moment, I just held the card. I could feel him waiting for my answer. Finally, I said, "I forgive you, Travis, but forgiveness doesn't erase the past. Boundaries stay." He nodded slowly, eyes wet. "I know, Mom. I don't want the boys to lose you." "They won't," I said, "but they'll know me on my terms, not through guilt or pressure." He came inside, and we sat on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. No talk of money, no talk of moving back. Just a mother and son sitting quietly, watching the sun dip low. It wasn't a full repair, but it was a start. That evening, after he left, I sat down at my laptop again. I wrote another post. When your love is mistaken for a checkbook, walking away isn't selfish. It's strength. And I meant every word. Now, each day feels different. I take morning walks in the park with Whiskers padding beside me on a little leash. I attend my lunches and quilting circle. I read books cover to cover, something I hadn't done in years. My money goes toward my life, not someone else's mortgage. I think back, sometimes to that kitchen, to the ultimatum that pushed me out. Pay or leave. At the time, it sounded like a threat. But in truth, it was freedom disguised as a demand. By leaving, I found myself again. And that's why I'm sharing this with you. If you've ever been treated like a burden unless you were paying the bills, if you've ever been made to feel like your worth depended on your wallet, I want you to hear me. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to keep what you worked for. You are allowed to walk away. So, I'll leave you with this. When your love is mistaken for money, leaving isn't selfish. It's survival. It's clarity. Tell me, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? If this story spoke to you, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button so more women can hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like mine, because the truth has power and we need to keep speaking it.